Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, and as always, I wish you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you join this podcast from all around the world, but a little bit closer to home today. I'm delighted to say that joining the podcast is a returning guest, somebody who last joined this podcast in October 2019, when the world was a very, very different place, and the landscape that he worked in was markedly different to the one that has been faced over the last 12 to 18 months and in the immediate future. Joining the podcast today is the Chief Executive of Manchester Central, Mr. Shaun Hinds. Shaun, welcome to the podcast today.
James, hello. Nice to see you again.
Absolutely, yes. And as I said, it was October 2019 that you and I last had a chat on this podcast. We were talking about some of the fantastic developments in terms of the tech infrastructure at the venue and all of the exciting things that were happening. I think one of the major political parties had just had or were just having their conference at that point. Their autumn conference was about to come into the venue. Loads of exciting things happening. And who would have thought that just, 4 or 5 months after that conversation that we had about all these exciting developments, that things would change as dramatically as they did. How have you been, first of all? How's the venue been, and how have you guys got through the last 12 to 18 months?
God blimey, yeah. And I remember when we last spoke, actually, and it's funny. Some of those investments that we made have proved to be sort of quite helpful and quite almost prophetic, actually, in terms of being able to predict what we might need. But look, all of the words, I think, have been used, haven't they, to describe this situation for our industry. And and it's no different here in Manchester as well. That I suppose it's widely known that we were converted into a Nightingale hospital, which certainly influenced quite a lot of the activity that we were getting involved in the early part of the pandemic. March through April, May, June last year, we were very busy, and I know there's a whole story about that as well, in terms of how we got involved and the liaison with the army initially, and then the local trust to develop the Nightingale. The role that we played as a venue, but also that some of our team played as well. So a lot of the guys that work with us, whether it's in hospitality, in the kitchen, and cleaning and security, they were able to come back and actually support the Nightingale as well. So it's good to see how the events industry was kind of part of that first line of defense. And that actually sort of wound me up a little bit in the early stages, because when the response to the pandemic was, if you like, taking shape, and it was announced what was going to be needed, it was the events industry that kind of stood up in a way, and it was our venues, it was our people, it was our contractors that were absolutely fundamental in establishing the network of Nightingales, and in many cases operating them as well. And yet that was being complemented by a real struggle on behalf of the industry to get the recognition that we needed, and recognition in the form of financial support, but actually in the early stages, just a definition that our businesses were the ones that were included in that array of businesses that had to close, and therefore would need additional financial support. And it took us a period of months to get a position, I think, which was, acceptable, but it certainly was by far from being perfect. And even now, as we are 18 months through this, there are still plenty of examples of colleagues, businesses, organizations that are or were intrinsic within the events ecosystem that have struggled to get that recognition, to get that financial support. And this our chat today isn't about that, but there are plenty of stories of real tragedy, not just from a health perspective, but from a business perspective, of good businesses, good shows, good companies, good people that have just been kind of metaphorically wiped out by this process. And we're in this long road towards recovery, but I'm relatively pleased and optimistic to say that I think I'm on that road now, and I think I've got a map that's slightly better than Google Maps on my phone, to plot the pathway out. And I think one thing before I let you ask the question.
No, please go. That's why you're here. You fire away.
And then I've gone and I forgot my train of thought, actually. But I think what I was going to say was we've had so many stops and starts along the way as we've navigated our way through this. And I think last year in the summertime, when we were all eating out to help out and doing all of this kind of stuff, I think we felt that we were on the back end of this pandemic, and that we were going to be getting back to normal. And of course, a year later, we find ourselves really at the beginning of that recovery journey. And the announcement last week, I think, was really important for us, as an industry. It gives us a validation, if you like, that we can now at least start to plan in earnest. But as everybody in the industry knows, you can't reopen an industry on Friday and then literally reopen the doors on Monday and expect people to be coming in. There is a planning process, and there is a lag. And I had some opportunity to make these points to some people in government that you're talking at about 6 months at least from a position of confident planning to having people walk through the door. And so I think we continue to work through that reality at the moment. But look, I'd say we're in a better place now than we were 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, there's a number of great points that you raise there, and talking points, not least the fact that there appeared to be this lack of understanding of the sheer planning that's involved in putting on any form of event. Call it what you will. It could be a trade show, a major conference, a festival, a music event. The sheer the detail and the length of the planning process that is required to actually get to those live days is something that I feel the whole industry felt like it was banging its head against a brick wall, and it's trying to explain that to government and to people in a position of power, in terms of getting that message across. We saw festivals being cancelled in January. People saying, well, why are they cancelling in January? They don't happen until June. Clearly with no understanding about the process that goes in, and why having that clarity at a far earlier stage would have helped the industry so much more dramatically. Are you able to sort of touch on some of those sort of discussions and how you tried to communicate those sort of messages to the people that you spoke to?
I remember we were frequently being asked by DCMS or base government departments about the impacts of extended closure and so on. And they would ask us, well, tell us about the shows you've got lined up for the next 3 months. If they can't happen, what will the impact be? And the point that we were saying to them all of the time, and people like Chris Skeeth, who was at the sharp end of dealing with government from the Association of Event Organisers, we would continually make this point that it isn't about the next 3 months. If you tell us we're not running events in the next 3 months, it's actually the next 9 months which we've got to worry about, because it means that everything's going to stop. So I think there was a massive what's the right word to use, but a massive over expectation or lack of understanding about how these events take place. And I think we were very complacent as an industry in our thinking that the observers in government, in authorities, the policy makers, the lawmakers, that they had this level of understanding that would be required to understand how the events industry works. I think we all saw these people coming through our doors as delegates for party political conferences that you've alluded to. Yeah. And so, and we all know that these people would have gone to a concert in their lifetime, or they may well have gone to another event. But I think the bit that was missing was that there was almost this complete disconnect between the final show being presented and all of the work that led up to the moment that show was able to promote, whether it's from the conception, the planning, the marketing, the branding, the PR, the artist liaison, the logistics, the site management, the rigging, the AV, the food and beverage, the cleaning, the security. I could go on and on and on. And I think we all know and we all understand that ecosystem intrinsically, but I think we massively overestimated the level of knowledge that we thought other people would have. And I think that tripped us up a lot of times. I'd say now there is a much clearer understanding, and I think the focus that we should be looking at now is reinforcing the connection. And I'm going to focus just on sort of the business events sector, covering exhibitions, trade events, conferences, seminars, that kind of thing. But we've got to really reinforce the connection between that genre of activity and the impact on economy, not just locally, which is it's huge for the areas where venues and events take place, but actually in some cases when you've got these big international shows, the impact that it will have on the wider national economy. And whilst it's not an economic incident per se, if you take COP26 coming up in Glasgow, that's a great example. Not necessarily of the economic impact, although there is a huge economic impact associated with COP that we should all be very aware of. But actually, the fact that that gathering in Glasgow in November is going to be fundamental to some of the policy and some of the change and some of the economics that will be bearing down on us globally as we continue to make our way through. It's the wrong choice of words, but as we address the climate crisis and we recalibrate our business, our expectations, both as businesses but also as countries in terms of that going forward. So the point which I'm sort of clumsily making is that there is this fundamental inherent connection between the live events that we stage and that long-term positive impact, either to education, research or economics. And I think that's the focus that I'll be looking at now. And we've got a great opportunity coming up. We are, hosting the Conservative Party conference in October, and we're currently working on hosting an events industry fringe event during that conference, where we're going to be talking about this exact topic. And it won't be about all of the stuff we should have done a year ago. It will be about how the events industry can contribute to the recovery and to the growth of UK PLC, and equally, UK as an independent entity in the EU and as a global trading partner as well. So I think there's lots to work on, lots to look forward to, and I think there's a pretty clear message around how our industry can contribute to that recovery, and that has to be the focus rather than looking back at we should have done this, we should have done that, we should have done something else.
Yeah, and it's what has really interested me as an observer, somebody who is in the industry, but as somebody who is also watching watching people like yourself and Chris Skeeth, as you said, and loads of conversations on LinkedIn and posts on LinkedIn, and people furiously batting for the industry in the last year or so, is that publicly all people have been waiting for is for events to come back. That seemed to me is something really strange. We had this industry that was on its knees and crippled. There was a lack of understanding at government level, a lack of support, a lack of clear understanding and guidance and support and insurances, any sort of scheme that would back the events industry getting back on its feet. And yet, when you look at actually what the public wanted post lockdown and post restrictions, all they wanted to do was get back out to events again. So we were the last industry seemingly to be considered and really understood during the lockdown. But as soon as the lockdown ended last week, all eyes were on. Right, great. So you're back open for business. Come on then, crack on. The public want their festivals. I suppose it was frustrating, but for organisers as well, there was an awful lot of understandable anger creeping in, and that they were sort of expected almost to get straight back up and running immediately after the restrictions lifted, in order to give the public all of these great events and activities that they've missed out on for a year. And I think that particularly was very, very unfair.
It plays to the heart of what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, which is that lack of understanding about the work, the effort and the timeline involved in delivering what on paper seems like a relatively straightforward event, a concert in a field or something like that, but actually it's so much more than that. But it's quite interesting, isn't it, that when you look at the appetite in the general public for things to do, events to go to, I mean, it is vast. You could almost literally open up an event to watch paint dry and it would sell out. I get that feeling, because people certainly were so keen to just do anything. And what I think, looking at the positives out of all of this, is that the live version of something, that opportunity to congregate, to gather in person, to attend something, that there's a real, people are really they're holding that with a great deal of affection, and therefore what it's going to do, I think, is it's going to stimulate and spawn some really interesting and creative and innovative genres of events being developed, right? Which I think will actually ultimately means that events are probably going to get better. The content will be better, the staging will be better, the arrangement, the organization will be better, because we've come through this period where we've known that we can't take any of this for granted. So actually the opportunity to go to something, I should hold that so dear, that I think what it's going to stimulate is some really interesting new activities, new events. I mean, we've got it just pointing out of my window, by the way, but we've got it just over the road. Home is a very well-established Manchester theatre group, and what they did on the back of, actually on one of the government arts and culture grants that was awarded, they've created a whole kind of ongoing pop-up festival called Homeground. So they've literally taken, a kind of a hard-standing kind of derelict car park area, hoarded it, chucked in some infrastructure, and they've created and curated a series of activities running, in the evenings, towards, I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and you can go and see theatre, comedy, music, great food, great drink, all of this stuff that's just been curated. And it's actually, it's brilliant, because it got conceived and opened at a time when you couldn't do anything else, because you weren't allowed to go indoors, you weren't allowed to go into theatres, weren't allowed to go to bars, etc. But actually, even now, with all of those other places now opening back up, home ground still remains a destination. We have another example here in Manchester as well, called Freight Island, which again has taken a derelict space, reconfigured it into an entertainment, bar, restaurant, kind of outdoor, just almost sort of pop-up festival. And it's been absolutely rammed, and fair play to them. They were almost the first to kind of launch under the new regime. And at every moment when there's been a change in the rules and regulations, they've been the first to come back out and say, right, we can do it. It's socially distanced, it's limited capacity, we're only going to do it for 2 hours at a time, but here it is. And I think that's really positive, something that's really positive and interesting that's come out of it. And hopefully we'll continue to see similar innovation. I think maybe finding its way into the more conventional, no pun intended, business events.
No, absolutely. It's something that's been mentioned, maybe not in huge detail, but certainly on a number of occasions on the podcast over the last few months, is that because of that desire to get back to something that we know and love, and like you said, that complacency. How many business events did you go to, in venues around the country, to go to, and they'd be boring as hell, a bit of shell scheme, some awful branding, few people milling around and shaking hands, because, we sort of got complacent a little bit and took them for granted that they could happen. And you're absolutely right. Now that we've missed them and we've had this period of time where we can't do them, there will be this sort of approach to generate inspiration, to really make sure that if you're going to open the doors to your audience, no matter how big or small or niche that audience may be, that you're going to give them something that excites them, that's made it worthwhile them making that trip to be in that space. And I would agree wholeheartedly that I look forward to seeing some of that sort of creative, some of that creative stuff being put forward and being demonstrated. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this may seem a slight digression, but somebody said to me recently that they think that culturally we've become far more continental as a result of this whole experience, in that we will make better use of our outdoor spaces, whether that be in pub beer gardens, whether that be for events, and you think about when we go on holiday to continental Europe, to the Mediterranean particularly, so much of life is conducted outside because they've got the weather. And okay, we might not have the weather year round here, but somebody did say that they think we're going to become a little bit more continental in our approach to utilizing outdoor spaces. Is that something that you've considered, with your own venue? I know that might be quite difficult given your location and the actual sort of makeup of the building itself, but what are your thoughts on that?
I say this frequently, James. I mean, apart from the coastline, the beach, the sea, the climate, the galleries, the architecture, the history, what has Barcelona got that Manchester hasn't got? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
And I think we joke about it actually up here because there has been this great expansion outside, and many of the streets in Manchester now are populated with these kind of temporary structures, and of course the government is talking about making that a more permanent fixture. Interestingly, up here, some of the streets that have been taken over what they've actually done is they've literally taken a lane off the highway, and put those big concrete blocks and built it up. And I think temporarily that's fine, but I wonder long term whether that's going to stick, and B, whether it's the right thing to do. Equally, we have some streets that are not quite the sort of the grand boulevards of Paris or Barcelona or Madrid, but they have seen life stimulated in the form of sort of open terraces in the middle of a pathway or on the sides, and it's been great. And I think we do run the risk of looking at it through our rose-tinted spectacles, because it is wonderful when it's anything from sort of and we're quite hardy up here, so anything above double figures temperature-wise, and we're quite happy to go outside. But the weather does make a massive difference, and I think that you'll find that some of that starry-eyed optimism might start to be diluted on a cold February lunchtime here in Manchester, when it's delivering a more Mancunian climate experience. Let's put it like that. But you asked me about our venue. Well, I think because of the way we're constructed, it limits the possibilities for us. But what I think we will see where we can is some of the forecourt spaces that we've got, some of our areas that are kind of in between different buildings. The possibility, I think, of us creating some outdoor spaces for, I don't know, relaxation, food and beverage, meeting spaces, that kind of stuff, putting in temporary measures to protect from climate irregularities, let's put it like that. I think I could see that happening. And it's great, and it does bring a vibrancy and a buzz to the place that actually contributes, I think, to the proceedings of a conference. In the same way that some of these streets, the retail shops are benefiting because the restaurants are now populating the middle of the footpath there. The same will happen with the events industry. I think once you've got that buzz and that vibe coming back to an environment, I think that will be positive. So we're gonna take as much advantage of it as we can. But it is, it's definitely something that works in the summertime better than it does in the winter.
Absolutely, yeah. I must ask you, moving on, Shaun, today, getting into the sort of more operational aspect of the venue and of the clients that you work with, and that your clients that you will already be working with, hopefully with, events coming up now in the next few months. We're recording this for perspective on the 26th of July, so exactly 1 week after the final restrictions were lifted in the UK, and things like nightclubs are allowed to reopen. And as I'm sure many of our podcast listeners tuned in to this particular episode will know, is that within 48 hours after nightclubs are allowed to reopen, they were told that as of the autumn, people will have to show proof of double vaccination in order to gain entry, which straight away reopened the debate about events. Shaun, I must ask you what your sort of current views are, and perhaps some of the conversations that you've been having at a higher level about the subject of COVID passports, vaccination proof, call it what you will, this idea that people will have to display some sort of either negative test or vaccination status in order to gain access to an event. How's it affecting you guys at the moment?
Well, it's definitely a topic. And I think when the announcement came out, it took us a little bit by surprise, but not too much, because we're well weathered now with, if you like, incomplete or slightly ambiguous statements coming out of government, only to be clarified when the small print is issued. So I think the approach we're taking, outside of the legal requirement or regulation that may or may not get introduced, is that we're working individually with each organizer about the particular measures that they feel are going to be appropriate for their show. And that's going to be based around all of the different things that feed into that: the numbers of people, the type of event they've got, the space that they've got available, all of those things. Most organisers, as you would expect, are taking a conscientious and cautious approach, which is let's put measures in which are, if you like, expected or would be expected by the broader population. But we're very much of the view that we as a venue will deliver the environment that has been stipulated by the organisers, subject to the conditions that they have to work to. If it turns out that you've got to prove that you've got a double vaccination and that's it, I think that's something that's probably not ideal. Far from it, probably. I think where as an industry, where we're much more comfortable along the lines of is the combination of certification options, which is you can either show a negative test, or you can show double jabbed, or you can show other evidence that that you may have, I don't know, you have it, or you've got antibodies, whatever that might be. However you do that, I don't know. Yeah. But I think we've wanted to have a more pro-choice kind of approach, rather than a kind of a diktat, if you like. Although there's something to be said about a diktat, which is that it is what it is, and you're either conforming with it or you're not. But interestingly, one of our organisers happens to be the Conservative Party. So and this is where it gets really interesting, because
an autumn conference.
Yeah, there's a subtle difference between the Conservative Party conference and the government. And of course, it's the government that's issued the statement, but then the government statement applies to the party of government. And it won't come as a surprise to anyone watching that there are differences of opinion within the wider party, and in this case it's the Conservative Party, about what measures and restrictions should or shouldn't apply. And because we deal primarily with the organising group within the Conservative Party, if you like, organisation company, if you like, of course, they're looking at it much like we are, which is this statement has come out. They haven't really fully appreciated what the implications are for the wider membership, and so we're just going to have to work it through. And I think where we are at the moment is that we're anticipating that there'll be a passing of time, a clarification around what's required and what's not required. But look, here's the nub of it. Actually, the nub of it for me is that as an industry, it's really important that when we reopen and we start delivering events, and for some venues, that's already happened. It's happening now, and it's happening in the next few months. It's really important that once we're open, that we don't close again. All right, because I think that would be catastrophic to the confidence among sponsors, exhibitors, delegates, speakers that we need to ensure that the industry can thrive. And so, as an industry, we've been very pragmatic around, well, actually, we're really good at responding to the environment around us and adapting what we do to ensure that we deliver the best and safest possible environment. So technically, I have no concerns about us being able to deliver against the requirements that are there. But I think we just have to be mindful of, whatever is insisted upon at a regulatory level, it has a knock-on effect operationally, and therefore, if you're having to go through a very protracted process of clarifying someone's certification or status, then actually all you're probably doing is creating a queue somewhere else in your environment that you've got to manage. So you have this unintended consequence of maybe creating a greater risk over here because you're trying to do the right thing over there.
Yeah.
But there are events taking place, like I say, this week. I think organisers are taking a very pragmatic approach to it. As far as I know, every venue is being helpful and trying to deliver the capability to allow the organiser to meet the obligations that they set, and it's setting those obligations that give the visitors, the exhibitors, and the delegates the confidence that they can come into that show, and it will meet their expectations around the environment that they expect. And we have to speak frankly about this. Is that if you are concerned about coming into spaces where there are other people, be that supermarkets, shopping centres, sports arenas, conference centres, whatever that might be, then there should be some onus on the individual to make the choice for themselves, perhaps not to put themselves into that environment if it's a very, very personal concern. If we're dealing with a particular set of rules and regulations that we all need to apply to, then so be it. But I think we cannot abdicate personal responsibility of doing something that we feel safe and comfortable in. You and I may choose that actually, given the first opportunity, we'll be happy to go to a concert, and we'll take it with whatever that comes, whether that's a queue, whether that's sitting right next to somebody, whether that's wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. We make those decisions ourselves. Corporate entities that are sponsors, exhibitors, paying for registration fees, they will operate and think slightly differently. And therefore, it's really important that whatever measures are determined, that they are delivered consistently. And I know from our perspective as a venue, speaking on behalf of other venues that I talk to, we have no concerns about being able to meet those requirements. We just urge the regulators to think carefully about exactly what those measures are, because if you're not careful, you're going to set up a series of unintended consequences, which become as difficult as the consequence you're trying to avoid in the first place.
Absolutely. And when you talk about unintended consequences, if you add any form of any additional layer to an event, that presents itself with an additional cost. And if you're not careful about that, and the cost ends up flowing down, let's say you take exhibitions, for example. The UK exhibition industry is responsible for a monumental billions of pounds worth of trade coming into this country, which at this point is critical. Trade exhibitions are going to play a massive role in economic recovery, in post-Brexit landscape, etc., etc. If you start prohibiting those companies from exhibiting because the costs are going up because of extra layers of administration that have to be factored into the organising level, that could play a massive that could have a huge impact on the viability of shows, on how much trade is actually done as a result of those shows. So it's not just the operational impact. It's not just the operational impact on getting people into the venue quickly or queues outside. I think people have to look even broader than that and look at what the potential knock-on effects are for these shows and the exhibition industry as a whole, and the potential trade damage that could do by not having, I don't know, having 10% fewer exhibitors coming to those shows.
Yeah, I think it's about proportionality, isn't it? It's about making sure that the measures that are imposed do not detract from the purpose of why we're trying to meet in the first place. It's like so when they were talking about pubs and nightclubs and stuff, you get to a point where you have to jump through so many hoops that actually there's no point in going to the pub or the restaurant or the nightclub, because it's actually a poor experience. And I think a similar thing applies to the work that we're doing. But I think it's got to be proportionate, because the costs have got to be manageable for the reasons that you've said. There's no audience, by the way, for our industry complaining about the cost of keeping people safe. That is a very short argument, all right, that you're never going to win. So I think we have to be careful about saying, oh, well, we can't do this because it's cost or that or the other. For me, that's an irrelevance, complete irrelevance. If the measures are proportionate, then the costs will be proportionate as well.
Indeed.
And as venues and organisers and sponsors, we all know that there's a role that we all play to contribute to our shared objective, and our shared objective is getting these shows live and operating again. And so, I listen sometimes to parts of the hospitality industry complaining about, we can't get staff. And I was listening to somebody the other day, and he was saying, yeah, it's impossible to get minimum wage staff. And I'm thinking, you're already making the argument against your plight yourself, because some of the problems, I think, as an industry that the wider hospitality industry is faced, it comes down to this complacency again. This complacency that we can always get staff because we're part of the EU. So we'll have people coming in from, let's say it's Eastern Europe for housekeepers, to use a cliche, for example. They'll always be there. Let's say it's other Mediterranean visitors coming in to work in our bars, whatever, and they're always there. And there's been a level, I think, of complacency, dare I say, exploitation, that there'll always be this flow of resource. And I think we've got to start to think differently. We've got to ensure that when we bring people into our businesses, that they're given, a rewarding, if you like, compensation deal. And that doesn't mean we're going to be paying, people, 60 grand a year to work behind a bar with a company BMW or anything like that. But we've got to be straight with people. And I think if we're going to have sustainable events, sustainable industry, and we're going to give people real good career choices, that they can make a positive decision to come into our industry and stay with our industry, rather than do it as something while they're waiting to do something else, then we've got to tackle these issues, and we've got to do it properly. And so that means that customer expectations have got to be changed as well. But let's look at, we're getting completely off topic here. I hope this is for the podcast, but let's think about for a moment the restaurant industry. And now a couple of things that's come out of the pandemic. One is you've got to reserve a table, right? Yeah. Two, you've probably got to pay for that table, or at least put a deposit down on the table. And the single biggest problem that restaurants were talking about prior to the pandemic was the cancellation epidemic, which is that people book tables and then don't turn up. So these restaurants on a Friday night, they're expecting 90 covers. They only get 70, but they've ordered food for 90, and there's all of this wastage and everything else. Everyone's getting very upset about it. And of course, the simple answer is, well, actually get people to reserve their table and get them to put a deposit down. Yeah. Jobs are good. Yeah. That is now happening. That's standard. Ordering. We all go into a restaurant and you're waiting, you're trying to catch your waiter or waitress's eye so you can order your food, and then they come, and then half of your party don't know if they're having what starter they're having, and they don't know if they want their main course, and then they've got to go back and shall I give you another 5 minutes? Yeah, please do. And then they're gone for another 10 minutes. All of a sudden now we're ordering online as well. So you're looking at the workflow of, and this does apply, I think, to elements of our industry as well. If I look at banquets and stuff like that, for example, in our business, you're looking at that whole workflow and saying, actually, the human requirement at this stage and this stage of the process has now been minimized because we've automated it. So we've got a positive there. We've got an advantage there.
Absolutely.
So let's actually use our resource to deliver a better customer experience. So there are ways through it because of things that the pandemic has forced us to do. And I think that there are some similar examples that we could probably cite in the events industry, which will help us as we navigate what is going to be, challenging months ahead as we look to recruit back the teams of people that we need to deliver the events that we run.
Yeah, and hospitality, food and beverage, they're intrinsically linked with, with the events industry. I mean, how many large scale dinners and event and awards events have you seen within your own venue there? Where you have literally hundreds of staff working, the floor for 1,000 people at dinner. And you think if somebody wants to order a drink and that person has to walk right across the floor to the table in the middle, take the order, then walk all the way back, and they've got to do that 20 times over the course of the evening. they're no longer having to do that, that first trip. They get the order in at the bar, and then they just grab the drinks and they take it to the table. You're halving the amount of time that they're making unnecessary trips by utilizing the technology that was there beforehand. I've pointed this out again over the last few months. A lot of this technology has been around for a long time. QR codes have been around for a long time. And all of a sudden, in the last 6 months, people have got their heads around what they can actually do and how they can quickly open a web page, and you can then quickly order your food and then pay for it on your Apple Pay on your phone instantly. And I think you're absolutely right to point out that events, hospitality, all those industries have been forced down a certain route in the last 12 months, which, whilst not ideal, will have a number of positive outcomes as a result of adopting more streamlined operational procedures. And I think that's something that we carry forward and will help massively going forward.
And I think, again, in the old days, when people look for efficiencies, they're looking at cutting out costs so that you can maximize margin, maximize profits. And I think that what we can now do is we can use that technology to optimize the operational process, which then has the knock-on effect, hopefully, of better margins and better profits long term, but with a more positive, which is that actually the team members you've got working in that environment have got a more sustainable and a more rewarding career path ahead of them. I think one quick point about something you said a moment ago, which is about how events will have to kind of get better, and that we've all been to those events that maybe haven't been at the sharp end of what's happening. I think mediocrity is going to be one of the casualties of this pandemic. There will not be the appetite, the space, or the acceptance of a half interesting, poorly delivered event of any kind. Actually, not that people will crave that experience, but it will need to deliver. And I think that good organizers, good venues, good content owners are very tuned into that and are looking at all sorts of interesting ways to bring their brand, their IP, their content to life in different ways, which ultimately open up new revenue opportunities. I mean, if you map out the stages of where we are as we've gone through this pandemic, I mean, many businesses are still in this kind of survival mode. We've still got government financial support. We're still unsure about what our future revenue paths look like. But eventually, we'll shift out of survival mode and we'll get into more of a kind of rebuilding, recalibrating mode, where we start to look at ways to optimize these forced changes that we've had to employ.
Absolutely. Shaun, we're rattling through time today, but there's something that I've been wanting to ask you, and I've been wanting to ask the top dog in any of the major exhibition venues and event venues, actually. So I'll take this.
I hope I don't let you down then.
No, I'll take this opportunity. It relates to having multiple events running within your venue at once. You at Manchester Central have a capacity to do that. You have multiple different facilities within there, and I know that a whole other topic is some of the stuff that you've actually launched, like the studio at Manchester Central. But when it comes to operating multiple events at the same time within effectively the same venue, which is going to happen in a number of different other venues because of the backlog, how are you going to approach that in terms of the differences in protocol? You mentioned that events will look at it, on a case-by-case basis. They will look at their audience, what's right. They may have a degree of flexibility. How are you going to then juggle all of those clients together?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we're fortunate because we do have different spaces, and because of that we have different entrances and different exits, so we can segregate, for want of a better word, different events across different parts of the building, and not compromise the experience that those organizers will get. Now, we can do that at the moment because I think that's the environment that we live in. If you got to a point where you're talking about lots and lots of larger scale events happening simultaneously, then clearly you're going to get potentially some sort of cross fertilization and contact and stuff like that. And so, but I suspect that by the time we're back in that nature of the game, then actually the concerns and restrictions will have eased further,
Sure.
because it kind of goes hand in hand, that you're not going to have super large scale events if you've still got these issues. But yeah, I think for us it's about having a really clear pathway through the venue and very clear allocation of resources. I suppose the biggest issue for us is that in some occasions we've been able to operate one central concierge facility serving 5 or 6 events that might be taking place, all managed through one single entrance and exit. The difference right now is that we're going to have to manage multiple entrance and exits. So the economy of scale that we may have had previously by managing multiple events through one gateway, if you like, we lose that economy of scale, and each event will have to take care of its own entrance, ingress and egress arrangements based upon the fact that they also have a shared motivation to ensure that they keep their areas separate. We saw this. We just hosted MIF, the International Festival, by the way, and we've got our QR code for the venue, that you scan when you come in. Yeah. What we did with MIF actually was that we actually gave each event. Sometimes we had 4 things taking place. Each show had its own QR code, so that we could distinguish between those people that had come into the venue for the recital versus those people that had come into the venue for the concert. So that way you wouldn't unnecessarily be track and traced if you've been in one side of the venue and then somebody else in another side of the venue, but the common denominator was our single QR code. We eliminated that, separate QR codes for each event. Jobs are good.
A delineation of where people have been. It's a great point to raise, because again, that's a whole other topic of conversation, isn't it? The test and trace and the pingdemic at the moment that we're all going through, and being able to then distinguish. You walk into a venue like Manchester Central, you could be going into multiple different areas and come nowhere near, literally within hundreds of meters of another person that by rights has also been under the roof of Manchester Central. So it's a great point to make, that you can actually distinguish that, within the confines of the venue as a whole.
And this is one of those interesting things that venues are not obliged now to show the QR code, but they're encouraged to do it. And we are, we're certainly working with organisers to have that protocol, because also it gives a certain amount of reassurance. Visitors, they like to know that the organisers and the venues are following these procedures, because it just gives them that extra layer of comfort. So we will continue to do that, I think, as long as that is a valuable resource. But yeah, the pandemic is and I hate these brands that these organizations, that these things end up being given by the mainstream media. But it is a real problem. It is a real problem. It is. My car was due to go in for a bit of body work tomorrow, as it happens, and the paint shop called me this morning and said we can't do it because all of the people that were going to do your car are isolating. And well, that's pretty ridiculous, but I understand.
Absolutely. I'm going to put you on the spot one final time before I wrap up, Shaun, and that's to ask, would you come back on in a few months' time once you've gone through this process, maybe of having that week where you've had multiple events within the venue at one point? I'd love to speak to you again, if that's okay, in a few months' time, about some of these operational procedures, what you've learned. I'm sure you'll have stuff to feedback that you've learned by, as events increase and the capacity increases back at the venue. So it would be great if you could make the time again in a few months' time to come back on and talk to us. We'd love to chat with you again.
Yeah, it would be a pleasure. And we're going to learn, I think, so much as we make our way through, August, September, and into the autumn time. And so in a couple of months, we will have a completely new perspective, I think, on a lot of this stuff. And who's to say a lot of these things may not have disappeared anyway? I mean, I think we all hope that is the case.
Fingers crossed, everybody. We've been talking on the podcast today to Shaun Hinds. Shaun is the Chief Executive at Manchester Central. And if you want to find out a little bit more about what those guys are up to at the venue and all of the stuff that they've got on offer under that particular brand, manchestercentral.co.uk is their website. Obviously, search for them on all the regular social media channels, but all sorts of other stuff that we could have talked to Shaun about today, about what's going on within the venue itself and stuff that they've done over the pandemic. And as I said, studio at Manchester Central is something that the perhaps many of our listeners would be interested in, and hop onto their website and have a little look at that and find out what they're up to. Shaun, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been great to have you back on the show. We look forward to seeing you again in a few months' time. Anybody who is listening to today's podcast through their headphones whilst they're out and about, don't forget that you can hop over to eventindustrynews.com and you can check out all the latest news, features and supplements, as well as previous episodes of our podcasts and video versions of all the podcasts as well. Of course, if you are watching this already on eventindustrynews.com, you can also go over to your chosen podcast platform and listen to audio versions of all 240 something, nearly 250 episodes that we've recorded over the last few years. It brings us to the end of today's episode. It's been fantastic to talk to Shaun Hinds from Manchester Central today, and I look forward to seeing everybody on the next edition of the podcasts. Goodbye.